Ashley. So an official welcome to this webinar. I'm joined today by a panel of illustrious guests. We have Nigel Clark, we have Brendan Llewellyn and Joe Pereira, and I will introduce them. Well, I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit later. And they are our panelists here today on this, what I'm hoping is going to be quite an interactive session in our session 2 or episode 2 of our series of 3 webinars on the topic of how to future-proof your brand. And we're going for a slightly different approach. There's no official presentation involved in this one. We're not going to sort of bog you down in PowerPoint. This is all about the discussion. This is all about examples, current thinking, and different perspectives on the topic of how to avoid greenwash. And this is a very, very pertinent topic that a lot of people are encountering. And as I say, this is the second of the 3 episodes in this series. The next one is the same time, same place next Tuesday, which is how to build a sustainable brand. So taking last week's episode today together and then kind of working out and trying to figure out collaboratively what those next steps are that you can take to build a sustainable brand into the future, which obviously for a lot of us is really kind of how we're looking to implement this. If you were here in the last session, thank you and welcome back. If this is your first encounter with this webinar series, there are kind of a couple of reasons really why we're doing this, is because collectively we feel that this is probably the perfect storm. It has arrived and now is a very pertinent time to really start to move beyond the thinking and the talking into action. So this is a very kind of action-orientated series, and it's an introduction to the corporate responsibility, sustainability practitioner's apprenticeship. That's a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically the apprenticeship that the college will be launching later this year, which is about the step-by-step implementation of lots of these ideas. And we're also working here in association with the Mindful Collective. If you haven't come across the Mindful Collective, go to mindfulcollective.net for lots of advice, guidance, and really importantly, lots of good examples and case studies. The Mindful Collective is a not-for-profit organisation dedicated to working collaboratively with you to try and take the next steps. There are models and tools and ideas to really get you thinking, and hopefully some things that you can take back to your organisation to make those next steps. So if you haven't been there already, head over to mindfulcollective.net to find out more. The previous session, which I have just mentioned briefly there, if you haven't seen this, I would strongly recommend that you go back and watch the catch-up session of this, and details will be available later on this one. We were looking at the topic of why marketers should embrace sustainability. So we were putting some challenges out there that marketing has this almost unique opportunity right now to be really leading the debate on marketing sustainability and really kind of embracing it. Nigel, who's one of our panelists today, took us on a brief sort of introduction, if you like, to some of the terminology and to some of the critical thinking that we need to do to really begin to introduce this to our organisations. And then I was fortunate enough to be in conversation with Joe, again, another one of our panelists here today, who's one of the co-founders of the Mindful Collective. And we were talking about some of the challenges and some of the reasons why now is the best time to be doing it. And a lot of people have been talking about this over quite some considerable time, but we are all now starting to think, as we come out of all of the restrictions over the last 18 months, that now is the time to strike with this stuff. Within that session, we asked a question, and the question was, how important is it that marketing leads the sustainability debate in a business? And there was an overwhelming support, and I guess because a lot of people obviously listening to this and taking part in that session were probably engaged in marketing or the surrounding teams and departments and roles within their organizations. Probably unsurprisingly, there was a critical mass that said it's either 72% said it's very important that marketing leads the debate, 21% somewhat said somewhat, and 7% said kind of not very. So the the critical mass really are thinking that, you know, marketing is very well placed. And so some of those things will be taken into the third session in this series to kind of figure out okay, if we should take accountability and responsibility for leading this, how can we do it? What are the things that we can do? What are those building blocks? What are those tools that we can use to take this forward? But here today, we're here sort of going to be in conversation in just a very short while. I'm going to be handing over the microphone to the guests on our panel to basically sort of almost give the alternative view here, because once you start on this journey, you will be challenged. Undoubtedly, you'll be challenged. And the challenges will come from any stakeholders that you encounter, both internally and externally, because people right here, right now, even if you're a very well-intended marketer, they are skeptical over the messages, the communications, and the authenticity of you as an organization. Now, I'm not going to make this personal to you, but this is being encountered by every single marketer who goes on this journey. Your stakeholders are skeptical of the things that you're saying and how you're approaching this. So having a real deep understanding of some of the ways that you can approach this challenge of greenwashing, this challenge of, well, you know, you're not completely authentic, are you? And the picking holes in your brand positioning and your communications. It's absolutely vital that you understand things that you can do to either counteract that or to pre-plan falling into some of these, you know, inevitable traps when you start to be preaching the great stuff that you're doing. So that's really kind of what we're here to explore here today. And then, as I said, what we'll be doing in the final session of this series, same time, same place, next Tuesday, is taking those initial steps. Nigel will be sharing a sustainable branding presentation to kind of tee up some of the ideas around how you can take these steps. And then we'll be in conversation with Charles Nixon, who's the founder of Cambridge Marketing College, an economist, historian, forecaster, strategist, you name it. Charles has a lot of views and a lot of really interesting examples to share of organizations who are already building sustainable brands. So there will be a whole host of things that we can learn from both the session today and the upcoming session. But before we get into meeting the panelists who are waiting patiently here on the stage in front of us, I just want to do, as we've done in the previous sessions, a quick little question, okay, which will tee up the initial conversations that we're going to be having with the panelists. Now, Lauren is going to launch for us a little poll. We always try and sort of get you engaged with this. And as we said right at the start, if you have any questions for the panelists or any observations, then use the chat button to post those, and I'll try as best I can to address any of those questions as we go through this. But we have a little question that has appeared in the poll on screen in front of you. And the question is, marketing sustainability is not just about a good story, okay? It's about the evidence behind it. So how much evidence does your business use right now when you communicate corporate social responsibility and green/eco messages? How much evidence does your business use right now when you communicate these kinds of things? So if the answer is everything that you publish, everything that you communicate is always evidence-based, tick that button. Sometimes it might be that some evidence is occasionally shared, tick that button. If you don't share evidence, but you do collect evidence, there's a button to tick. And actually, if evidence isn't something that you actually have even thought about when you're communicating sustainability or eco or green or CSR, then just click the we don't collect evidence. This is an anonymous poll, so anything that you do vote won't be associated with your particular login here, so you can be really, really honest about your organization. And we're not here to judge. I always will say that. Yeah, we're here to be skeptical and cynical and challenging, but we're not here to judge you as an organization. So be really honest with your answer here, because it'll be very interesting to everybody to see kind of where collectively you feel we all are in this whole kind of use of evidence behind the stories within marketing sustainability that we're currently publishing. And this could be articles, this could be part of the overall brand position, or this could be stuff that you're doing in social. So as soon as Lauren feels that we are in a position to share the poll, she will close the poll when everybody has voted, and then we'll see the answers, which could be very interesting. So the answers are out, and here they are. So we have the view that 26%, so a quarter of those on this particular webinar, will always put evidence behind their messages that they're putting out. 65% are saying that some evidence is occasionally shared, and 3% say that we don't share the evidence we collect. And interestingly, only 6% are not collecting evidence. So for me, already, there is a strong sort of critical mass of people who are already collecting and sharing evidence. And I think that really starts to position us really quite well in this whole debate about how we can actually avoid it. Because if we're avoiding this whole concept of greenwashing, clearly quite a few people are already really quite actively pursuing this, then we potentially are in quite a strong position. So that's where we're starting off. I'm going to come off of the screen sharing now, and I'm going to now basically introduce you to the individuals that we have in our panel for this session here today. So Nigel, would you like to introduce yourself first, and then we're going to hear from Brendan and then from Joe.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Nigel. I'm the head of marketing communications for a global environmental and sustainability consultancy. I'm also have the pleasure of being a tutor at Cambridge Marketing College, and I'm involved in the development of the new corporate responsibility and sustainability apprenticeship that you referred to earlier, Neil. And I'm very looking forward to this session. I'm very looking forward to the comments of our audience, because I was quite pleased, somewhat surprised by the response on that poll. I was expecting to see a lot less evidence-based communication. So I'm interested to hear what people have got to say, and interested in their questions.
Hi, Brendan Llewellyn. I've been consultant in marketing and strategy for a while, 25 years. And about 10 or 11 years ago, we started a business called Advisor Home, which is a network of financial advisors. I do with 20,000 of them and work with a lot of the bigger financial institutions. Through that vehicle, we've got involved a lot in green issues, ESG, as they term it in that sector. I think we're on to our 6th guide to advisors. We're on 4 or 5 events. It's a massive issue. It's growing by the month. Grew enormously last year, sort of during the first year of the pandemic. And it's something we'll talk about over the next hour or so, but the world of investments has transformed itself towards that's the big question, you know, is it lip service or is it real? And that's what we're going to be talking about, the extent of greenwashing in different ways. So looking forward to this.
And I'm Joe Pereira, co-founder of the Mindful Collective with Neil Wilkins, and our focus is on co-creating a network of consultants and volunteers and content creators to create as much material and processes, documentation, sustainability workshops that can help people drive towards a more purposeful and environmentally friendly companies.
So thank you, gentlemen. That's you can see we've got a very interesting panel coming at this from quite different perspectives, and I think this is where we're going to find some of the ideas and thinking very interesting as we go through this session. So the very first question that I have for you is kind of one that we sort of teed up in the introduction, really, to the particular session that we're on today. And I'm going to point this in the direction of Nigel to kind of get things started. One of the questions that is, I guess, you know, on a lot of people's minds really is kind of, where do we feel that well-intended marketers typically have gone wrong? Why is it that this whole concept of greenwashing has really come about?
Thanks, Neil. So I think there are two sort of things that lie behind greenwashing, really, and I'll position marketers in sort of two camps, certainly overlapping, but from two places. And I'll be interested to see if Brandon Brendan and Joe agree or disagree. But I think there's the kind of innocent camp, the innocent enthusiastic camp. So marketers are typically want to put their best foot forward. They're typically enthusiastic. We are prone to being slightly immodest in things that we say. So I think there are marketers who in the past have sort of taken a campaign, taken something that is possibly not evidence-based, and have just kind of put it out there in a positive style, in a positive fashion. Well, that's the intention. And unfortunately, as you said earlier, Neil, because of examples, there is some cynicism out there. So people do not take things at face value. They do not just buy into your sort of innocent enthusiasm, and you probably not really understood the storyline, and therefore you get hung out to dry on it. So I think there is that kind of innocent enthusiasm piece, which comes from a good place, doesn't necessarily deliver a good message. I think the second place is where marketers are not involved in the sustainability debate. They don't understand the sustainability picture within their companies, and they effectively get told by a corporate function or by their executive or by their senior managers, this is the message we want to put out there. This is what you've got to do. You've got to tell this story. And they are complicit in the greenwashing situation, maybe have not originated it, but just they're not part of the debate. They don't understand the debate. So I think those are the two areas. The examples I've seen that have gone wrong, they've either come from, they've overstepped the mark, been over enthusiastic, or really they've just pushed out a message that somebody else has written, somebody else has styled, and you know, what can we do? We're just marketing kind of thing. So that's where I think the worst cases of greenwashing come from.
What about you, Brendan? Obviously, you've, as you say, you've spent many sort of years sort of thinking about this and you know, supporting organisations who are kind of on these journeys. Where do you feel that marketers potentially have either gone wrong or not been necessarily enabled enough to do this thing?
Yeah, there's a huge number of challenges. I think some of them are about terminology and language and understanding what we're actually talking about here. And I think that it's very easy to hear a word like greenwashing and imagine that it therefore must relate only to matters relating to greenness or the environment. And actually we use it more broadly than that. I mean, when people talk about Boohoo failing, their failure was on, if you like, on a social failure, on the amounts that they were paying or not paying to their staff in different parts of the world. So that, yes, it was greenwashing, but not in any kind of literal sense. And I think we need to constantly sort of get ourselves back on track and think sustainability is such a broad area. I mean, there are more than 50 shades of greenwashing, and that's partly because they're not all about one kind of thing. They may be about a failure of governance or a failure of inclusivity. And we used the word CSR earlier, it might be that kind of a failure. So there's lots of different ways that you can fail. Marketeers are often not that involved in all of those issues. I mean, if the issue is, for instance, the pay gap within a gender pay gap, for instance, or an ethnicity pay gap, it may well be that the marketeers are not. It's nowhere near their key responsibilities. So the answer is whether you're a marketeer or not, if you want to embrace sustainability, you're going to have to expand a lot beyond your core job description, aren't you? Because you're going to really expand into whatever the business is doing. And that's obviously a classic definition of a great marketeer, is one who is completely aligned with the business. And the least relevant marketeer was one who regresses into the narrower ancient versions of marketing, which non-marketeers describe as the brochure painting department. So I think it's behoves anybody with an aspiration to be relevant as a marketeer and relevant as a sustainable marketeer to get further and further and further into the depths of the business, because ultimately that's what the consumers consume, rather than just little bits.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Joe, just that takes me on to thinking back to the conversation we had last week in the previous webinar, where we were talking about kind of almost like ownership of the proper marketing mix, the real marketing mix, and the whole idea that, you know, marketers are typically, I think, in a lot of sectors and a lot of instances, really almost fallen just into pure marketing communications and lost sight of the fact that really you're responsible for process, you're responsible for product in its fullest sense, and also for the people element, and kind of really considering that whole broader marketing mix, which has purpose in as another P that we talked about. Do you think that this is one of the reasons why marketers have kind of like almost sort of gone wrong, is because purely the focus on marketing comms, particularly with digital marketing, is kind of almost sort of overshadowed the proper kind of full extent of the role?
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about that last week, but also, you know, in terms of falling short, we've talked about the position marketing, or the positional authority that marketing has within the organization. In the chat there, I can see Lydia spoke about constantly trying to fight tooth and nail to get statistics, but being asked to push a sustainability message. And that's probably from a more senior position where they know that it's on trend, they know that they need to be doing something, but they can't be bothered to put in the actual legwork to do it. And the positional authority where marketing has within the organization, where it can say, look, these are the perceived risks we have by going forward without having all these statistics. It's about not just about what you're pushing out externally, but understanding your position in the culture within the organization of how marketing could be influential. And sometimes that takes speaking the language of perhaps board level or senior management, where we don't just say the reasons why it's a good idea to have these things, but we present it in terms of business risk and business opportunity. And we really have to kind of push and make that case study that's a little bit outside the norms of a traditional role of marketing, where we talk about just externally how we're listening to a customer group, and we talk about those wider stakeholder groups and how we can influence their behavior and their actions to kind of lead them towards more beneficial outcomes. And so if you know, marketing within the organization kind of lacks that authority, isn't kind of expanding its reach to speak internally and externally about sustainability topics, then you can just be asked to push a sustainability topic which you don't have the right evidence for, that can lead to backlash, that can end up tripping you up.
Just want to build a little bit on that word stakeholders that you've used there. So Maria in the chat raises a really interesting point, the fact that companies often struggle to get evidence on the bigger picture, i.e. across all the stakeholders. I'm particularly thinking kind of supply chain here. Do any of you think that, again, one of the reasons why this has been a problem is because marketing maybe has sort of been pigeonholed into a comms or kind of internal silo, rather than taking the broader perspective of, you know, the overall supply chain? I mean, I'm probably looking a little bit more here with Brendan in terms of like advisors, for example, who you work with in the financial services sector, where they don't necessarily own the end product, but they're kind of as part of a supply chain. You know, if they're talking one story and yet the actual product delivery end of the process is talking another, there's lots of kind of leakage here, isn't there, of you know, potentially greenwashing news or bad news or challenges. Could be quite challenging if, as a marketer, you're not focused on the whole extent of the supply chain.
Yeah, there's no doubt it's a huge issue. I mean, you know, on that particular point, financial advisors fairly soon won't have much of a choice. I mean, the EU Finance Initiative will require any firm in that sector to look quite closely at their supply chain, no matter where it comes from, and to ask the relevant questions, and they'll be given templates to what those questions should be, so that they will no longer be able to say, well, I don't know what, you know, I deal with the Prudential, God only knows what they do. That's not good enough. You've got to actually understand in order to present to your client. And that's even when the product that you're marketing to your client is nothing to do with ESG or specifically green issues. It's about the behavior of the firm that's supplying you. And I think it's really interesting. I did some work on business ethics 2 years ago now, and we interviewed many different people. One was a Savile Row tailor, which you might imagine that's an interesting one. I mean, this guy had no issue with the ethics of selling a suit for £10,000 because he said if the consumers are daft enough to afford £10,000 for a suit, that's their problem. We asked him about his supply chain, and he didn't get further than Zurich or West Yorkshire, in other words, where his supplier wholesaler was. He had no interest or knowledge as to where the actual cotton was being grown and what the conditions were. It was completely beyond. He wasn't necessarily a cynical guy. He just hadn't ever thought about that. So people don't fully understand about the supply chain, but you kind of have to, don't you? And that's something that, well, it's not something that most marketeers would have gotten into. But I personally, I think that everything's a project. So if you're running a business today, there will be a sustainability project or a series of them. And I would very much hope that marketeers will be on that. But it might well be that there's someone else, for instance, procurement, who might take the lead on understanding the ins and outs of the supply chain. But overall, what matters most is does the business get it and understand that no business is an island. You're part of a matrix, and it just doesn't work to say, well, we do this, if in fact the people that lie beneath you do something much worse. It's all got to be looked at holistically. It's a massive challenge.
And actually, if I can just step in there in your point about Maria raised the point in the chat about complexity, and you touching there upon stakeholders and supply chain, Neil and Brendan. I want to kind of complicate it further, but and I touched upon this briefly in my presentation on last week's seminar. You've got that whole end-to-end piece. So you've got supply chain right through to customer use. So we've all seen the comments and the problems that fast fashion have made. That goes back quite a long way now, if you think back to No Logo and books like that, in terms of looking at where did Nike know where running shoes were getting made and things like that. So but I think the sustainability, or the broader sustainability debate, has taken that further on in terms of customer use. So we all hang oil companies out to dry for wrecking the planet, but actually it's us that are wrecking the planet, because we're using an oil company's products, and therefore the expectation is placed on the company to think about the customer use that they embed in society that puts things at risk. So marketers, I'm enthusiastic, as you know, about marketers, because I think marketers do understand end-to-end pretty well, and I think they do understand customer use, where a lot of the sustainability impacts are. But you need to take that into account with brand greenwashing, and the other piece, which obviously we all understand from marketers about this, about stakeholders, is it's not just about you communicating to customers. You are communicating and an audience. You've got a much broader audience there. You've got society, you've got government, you've got your regulators, you've got NGOs out there that will pick up on those messages. So a lot of the things that where companies come unstuck is what you're saying might actually resonate with your existing customer base, but where you might get hung out to dry is with other audiences, with other stakeholders, with shareholders, with what's driving the conversations in the financial sector is not necessarily the customers of financial products. It's the shareholders of organizations that saying, we don't think you should be doing this because we don't see that is going to add shareholder value down the line. So you have got to think along your supply chain, but you've also got to think about who are your messages going to hit, and how are they going to interpret them.
There's just to kind of pick up on a few of those points. It's actually interesting. You talked about oil companies and using their products and stuff like that. But it's a delicate balance, because we've spoken about in the previous episode about the need to change consumer behavior, or marketing being influential on consumer behavior. But when you do that without leading by example is when you can get tripped up by greenwashing. And I think the ability for a corporation to put the onus on the consumer as it's their responsibility to make a choice is just an age-old tactic that they've used before. Shell had quite an infamous backfiring tweet this year where they said, how are you willing to change to combat climate change? And there was change to renewable energy, change to this, and they're the 9th biggest polluter in the world. And they still continue to provide these goods and services and fall short on changing the way they do business. So I think whilst we talk about changing consumer behavior, marketers need to be really mindful that unless they lead by example and they are looking at internally at their own practices and being project focused on changing elements within their organization, within their supply chains, be really careful when you look at influencing consumer behavior, that you are leading by example and you're being honest and authentic about that, because trying to do one without the other can really lead to some backlash.
So I want to kind of delve a little bit more deeply on that. It's a really interesting in terms of timing, actually, that you describe it like that, because I was in conversation yesterday with a very senior, very influential marketer. And because of her position, she's very influential. And one of the things that we talked about was avoiding the vegan badge. And that was just a kind of a phrase that we sort of came up with in the conversation. I just made a little note of it. It's kind of almost like that idea of sort of piggybacking onto something that is a trending thing and thinking that that makes you mightier than thou, higher than thou, because it's, oh yes, we have a vegan product, therefore that's fine. We've done our kind of sustainability thing. I'm interested in your views, and any of the three of you can kind of jump on this one. How do we avoid the kind of if we call it this, the vegan badge? I mean, you know, obviously it could be, ocean-bound plastic. We do no ocean-bound plastic, or any of these other kind of phrases that we're seeing in the media that almost instantly are like a badge of honor, but can also be fundamentally challenged, because if you're saying you're vegan, you've got to prove that right the way through every single element of your business, everything that you do. It's not an easy thing to do. So is there a danger of kind of falling? Well, there clearly is a danger of falling into this trap of using some of the terminology within your branding. How do we avoid that?
It's a big challenge, isn't it? I mean, I think the answer has always got to be that you avoid doing things superficially, which is what the question is. Avoid a superficial sheen, vegan badge or whatever, by starting properly at the very core. So thinking properly about what your purpose is and engaging everybody, the stakeholders, as you can, who is interested in a renewed project. I think a lot of companies will need a renewed purpose project, because the nature of what it is to run a business may have tilted slightly over the past 18 months. There are lots of firms I talk to are saying that we're doing things slightly different now. And it's very difficult to say why. Why would the pandemic have driven that? It isn't strictly a rational thing, but it has shocked people, and it shocked them off their axes a little bit, and maybe in a good way. So the answer must always be, if you start at the very core and work outwards, what are we here for? What are we trying to do? If we're trying to engender well-being, what will that mean? That will lead you to possibly using some good old-fashioned metrics like a balanced scorecard. If you've got a green badge but you're failing somewhere else, then you haven't got much of a badge, have you? Your badge is very tarnished instantly. If it's not all if your ducks are not all in a row, then it's not going to work. So if you like, the project that we have in our mind's eye is multifaceted and looks at all aspects of the business, looking at suppliers, looks at the proposition, and then looks at the way the business is run. Is the business, adhering to the requirements, for instance, on gender pay gap? You don't have to publish those unless you're running a business of 250 or more. But what if you're running a business of 120? Wouldn't it be a good idea to at least look at that and indeed potentially publish it? Otherwise, you're hiding behind a piece of legislation. And then ethnicity, people are not required to publish those any pay gap or that aspect of a diversity failure at all. They can publish it if they wish. BP, to take an example we've used already, have said they are going to publish it. But that's an example of why the very biggest companies are the easiest target. So some of them actually will start to behave better than the medium-sized companies who are not that big a target. The media are not that interested in some minor company, but they're very interested in anything that BP does. So, I mean, that's a kind of long-winded way of saying that you avoid the badge mentality, just as you avoid the greenwashing mentality, by going right underneath to the start, to the core, and potentially re-engineering what you do to make it fit with sustainability, if that's your objective.
I definitely agree on that point about purpose and authenticity. I mean, I think that's absolutely got to be the place you start. And if you've not got that sorted out, then arguably you should kind of park everything else, until you do. I think if you have got a clear sense of purpose, or if you do know, what you're about as a business, for me, the next step that you have to really take is to understand where your significant impacts are. So you quoted two examples there, Neil, kind of a vegan badge or a sort of ocean plastics thing. If ocean plastics really, if you're a business that is using a lot of plastics, and you can find evidence that the decisions that you're making, either as a business or through your supply chain, potentially has material impacts in that place, then I think it's quite fair and absolutely what you should be doing is to work out what is your plan for improvement. And then if you believe in that plan, then try and earn that badge, try and justify your ability to be able to, say something positive on that agenda. But do the hard graft first. Don't just come out with a statement. And if really ocean-based plastics is not your thing, or you're not in a food company, and therefore you're not trying to make any decisions about whether people eat meat or vegan, then don't grab that as a totem, or almost as a sort of, well, don't worry what we're doing over here, just come and look at this nice thing over there. I think that's where a lot of this kind of greenwash goes wrong. Not just because people haven't put in the hard miles or understood things in the first place, but they kind of grab hold of something that really is not significant in their space whatsoever, and people kind of sort of see it as that somebody's using it as a distraction. So they're kind of going, well, why are they making a proclamation about this? Well, their real issue is over here, so don't use it as a distraction. And I think if that is a risk, then stay completely clear of it.
Yeah, there's a really good paper that was released, I think last year, I think it's last year, called "The False Promise of Certification," and it delves into the world of eco-labeling and certification programs that are kind of created by companies to target specific industry sectors, and it looks at the measurement tools that are in place for actually assessing their sustainability credentials. And it finds there's a lot of shortcomings in a lot of these kind of self-certified or certification companies as well. So I would say to avoid the risk of potential greenwashing and backlash, you really need to be skeptical about the companies that are say certifying you or certifying certain industry sectors as well, because if you go into a scheme thinking that you're going to get this badge and it's going to give you some halo around your company's head, and then an activist group or a skeptical customer does some extra research or delves deeper into it and finds that's not actually the case, then you can open yourself up to, like I said, perceived risk. And then that's again the language that marketers can use to management level when it comes to justifying doing the hard work in the graft is, okay, what are the perceived risks that my company faces? What are the shortcomings, and what are our sustainability opportunities along the same line as well?
So just adding on to that question then is okay, so a big one that most people have now heard of, it's obviously in recent years has become the badge to have, is B Corp. So B Corp then, just using that as an example, does it help or doesn't it help?
I think that B Corp can help change an agenda within the organization. It can get them thinking about measurement and metrics. It can get them thinking about purpose, but I think that people see B Corp as a solution to the problem. Like once we've got B Corp certification, we're rolling. And what it does is it's just a series of quite complicated metrics or measurements within an organization that helps the agenda, but it doesn't delve deeply, I don't think, into the core purpose of an organization or anything else. We've talked about, the distractions of business being B Corp certified, or, H&M producing a sustainability line, the conscious line that they have. It's like, okay, well, if that's the conscious line, then what are the rest of your products doing? It's an opportunity to shift the agenda within your organization, but it's not the whole story. And I think people need to be mindful of that, and of self-certification in general.
So it's an interesting one that Tom in the chat has just raised, is I think brands have to be very careful on the subject of purpose and not confuse it with doing good. So is purpose different to doing good?
Yeah, I saw that comment as well. Thanks for that, Tom. I think that's a very kind of spot on challenge. Just another way of looking at it is that, what is sustainability? It used to mean something very different. So sustainability, when I started consultant, meant it was one of the 4 things you had to have. You had to be compelling, differentiated, had to be achievable, and then it had to be sustainable. And that meant, it would go on. It wouldn't be a flash in the pan. Your business idea had legs. And sustainability is a marketing thought. There's no doubt about that at the moment. And then people are using it as a marketing thought and a theme idea, but it isn't in itself enough. If people didn't like the taste of Coke, and I think it would be very difficult for Coke to sustain its own business. There has to be something attractive in whatever it is that you're doing. Sustainability, I think, is going to be a requirement for businesses forever. However, it is not in itself and necessarily your primary area of differentiation. It may not be the core of your brand. When we say, let's not confuse purpose with doing good, well, your purpose may well involve the doing of good, but the vehicle for that may well have to be, will have to be something very precise in your actual detailed proposition. I don't think they're necessarily in conflict with each other at all. They could be in harmony, don't they, for it to work. But it's absolutely right that we can't just sell a drink anymore, and we can't just have a purpose of doing good. We have to have both in harmony.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, Brendan. I mean, some people, if people might have a, so if somebody buys a can of Coca-Cola and drinks that and enjoys that, that's adding to their day. That's so what, you kind of come back to the point of what is doing good. I agree. You want to try and do both things together. I mean, a campaign that I've not delved into it deeply, but one that I've seen that's kind of caught my attention in recently is Levi's Buy Better, Wear Longer campaign. So Levi's is a company that is selling jeans, I think, through some good thought and proper intention and some not half, pretty decent marketing, have latched onto the fact that if you buy a pair of Levi's, okay, it might cost you a bit more money, but they're better made, they last longer. You're not just buying a sort of cheap pair of jeans that you're going to wear a few times and then throw away. They're supporting the whole idea that there's a pair of trousers that you can wear for a long period of time. They'll help, fix them or do them up, or God, how many years now has it been that people don't sort of see the shiny new pair of jeans as being the best pair, but the pair that sort of they've been wearing for 20 years or something like that. So I think there is an element of a company that's kind of latching onto what they do, what they sell. They're still there to sell jeans and make money, but they're aligning it with something that they can help in terms of doing things better. And I would also sort of say is, you know, when Charles is on the webinar next week, and when Neil is talking to him, you know, there will be somebody that will absolutely say, you know, essentially companies are there for their core purpose. One of their elements of core purpose is to sell things, service things, make things, and make money. And that, you know, we're not, you know, I don't think any of us on here are trying to get rid of that and just kind of turn every business into a charitable institution. You know, goods and services will be continued to sold in a sustainable world. We will continue sustainable development. You know, anybody that's read the sustainability development goals, there's a big element in there about economic development, and economic development needs businesses to support them. So we're not just turning everybody into charities, but you know, you can do both at the same time. So
an interesting one then that is an extension of that then. So it is for a marketer's role. I kind of want to bring it back into sort of where the audience is probably sitting there, is thinking, okay, hear that, get that, understand that. Where do I start focusing? If I'm going to avoid, you know, this whole kind of greenwash thing, is it, from what you're saying there, Nigel, then is it that they need to become more empowered and more aware of circular economy, for example? The whole idea that you're part of an ecosystem that isn't just consuming, but it's actually about proper real sustainability, and the concept of working within circular economy, within the organization and within supply chain. And I'm just not necessarily just saying to Nigel here, I know Joe has a view on circular economy as well. I mean, it's a general question, but is circular economy maybe one of the answers to avoid greenwashing?
I'll answer quickly and then I'll hand over to Joe. It definitely is. If anybody sort of saw the webinar last week, I tried to come up with a rather crass definition of what sustainable marketing is, but marketers need to get beyond thinking about consumption today for today's consumers. We have to have in mind that whole concept around sustainable development, which is about development today that doesn't prejudice against development, consumers, you know, the future generations, and so circular economy, better use of resources, not creating wants and needs that frankly are not there, has to become part of a marketer's creed. Absolutely has to be.
Yeah, I think just in those 2 points, and also the Coca-Cola point on purpose, you know, a lot of research being done on purpose and organizational purpose, and the culture within an organization culture is a really big thing, the mindset of people in the organization. So typically where we want to get to is a state where an organization has its organizational purpose, which may be, you know, selling that bottle of Coke, that can of Coke, but also the meta purpose of an organization in general, and all businesses should be to serve, you know, the long-term well-being outcomes of everyone on this planet, and that involves balancing, you know, natural capital, human capital, you know, all 5 of those. In terms of circular economy, you know, Stephanie's raised the point there about the terminology, understanding the end users, the companies, the people being involved, understanding what we mean by circular economy, and a lot of people don't know. Net zero versus carbon neutral. I think as governments begin to legislate, you will see commonality begin to appear, and that's where, you know, people will reach a level of understanding. Doesn't mean that companies shouldn't be trying to progress along those ways, but it's very much about how you contextualize it within your audience, within your customer base, within your industry sector. If you're in the apparel industry, you know, circular economy is quite an easy concept to grasp, but if you're in the service sector, then, you know, it can be a little bit more complicated. So understanding the context within your environment is important when we try and communicate what we mean by certain terminology, and like you said, the importance of working with a wider range of stakeholder groups to kind of get an understanding of the impacts along the supply chain is what's really important when you're looking at them marketing that terminology to your audience.
I think the more we kind of listen to the answers here, the more that we kind of think about this stuff, it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as a challenge. I think to me, there's an interesting point that you raised, Joe, which is about this whole thing about sort of sector regulation. Yes, in time, undoubtedly, there will be legislation which will apply to all sectors. But if we just, for a minute, because we've obviously got to try and make this a little bit more practical for us as marketers, do you think then, panel, and I'll put this to anyone who wants to have a view on this one, that actually self-regulation, which is actually doing a little bit of a carrot and stick on yourself, so actually, the carrot might be, if you do this right, you can get some competitive advantage, but if you get it wrong, you're going to get stung by those who are influential in your sector. But taking it to a sort of a local sector level is the way to go forward. So maybe creating your own set of regulations that you kind of self-administer rather than waiting for government or industry association to kind of tell you how to do it. Is this time for us to step up to the plate and say, no, we're going to actually create the regulations here for ourselves so that we can actually kind of drive this whole thing forward and not just actually sit back and wait?
I think there's there's good examples. It's quite a bold move or a potential move to do, but there has been examples of what we call pre-competitive collaborations, which is organizations that have put themselves into a thought leadership role, engage their competitors, and engage their industry sector at a supply chain level. I can't think of many off the top of my head, but I think there was one in the kind of like the refrigeration industry to make their products more sustainable. And that's agreements that they've put in place at a supply level before they even begin talking about how they're going to innovate or design their products or how they're going to market and sell them. And that can be quite a bold challenge to their industry sector and put them in a good position competitively and brand position wise, where they're engaging in the issues and the topics within their industry sector and trying to lead the charge and trying to engage both competitors and their supply chain and saying, look guys, this is the issue, who's willing to join us? And that can be a great example of taking the lead and taking authority and thinking about how you position yourself in the market in a slightly different way, rather than just engaging the end users or the customers in putting your brand forward.
I mean, I think it's a sort of, every company of any size at all needs policies that they adhere to on diversity, on inclusivity, and that will cover all aspects of the way that they're run as an entity, and as well as that, the way looking at their impacts on the environment. And it's absolutely essential to my mind that we keep the real broad meaning of sustainability in mind always, and do not allow ourselves to constantly think sustainability is purely a matter of planetary extinction. It is that, but it's not only that, it's the rest of it as well. It's all got to be there in place. Otherwise, edifices will start to collapse and the companies will become cynical and they'll worry about the whole thing, saying we're doing one thing right, but goodness me, it's not been enough because we're doing something else clearly badly wrong. So I think whether it's by sector or by region or by subsector or by company, I think I'd start with company. A company has to have those policies and believe them and go with them. And if they can collaborate, all well and good as well. And if that means that they're ahead of government legislation, then that's great. They've then got something to market, if you like. If they're ahead of whatever the standard is, then they become, exemplars for themselves and a reason for customers to come to them and a reason for people to work for them. It becomes an exciting brand mission. Companies don't do well when they sort of adhere to government regulation because they feel slightly embittered, they feel slightly annoyed, they feel it's costing them money, etc., because they're having to do it on somebody else's timescale. If you do it yourself as a business, you're on the front foot. You can organize for it, you can deliver it more cost effectively with greater motivation for all parties.
So I wonder if what we're creating here, I'll let you have a word there, to Nigel, in just a second. I just wanted to capture this thought whilst it's kind of fresh in my mind, just again, building on Stephanie's point in the chat about the kind of the terminology. I wonder if actually what we're creating here is the thinking that, as marketers, we're all very familiar with brand guidelines, because we know that those are the boundaries, they're the statements, they're the kind of almost like the rule book. the playbook within which we can then communicate as a business. I wonder if what we're suggesting here then, if we go down this whole kind of self-regulation idea, and maybe again, building on your earlier point, Brendan, about using the balanced scorecard to get that broader perspective, I wonder, just to use a sort of like a marketing friendly approach, whether actually we're creating some marketing sustainability guidelines. So almost the marketing sustainability version of the brand guidelines. So we're actually putting in place this rule book, playbook, the kind of almost like the set agreement that as an organization working maybe to this kind of higher purpose that we talked about before, we now have this playbook within which we can be really confident that if, as long as we follow these rules that we've set for ourselves, we're not going to be greenwashing because it's authentic, it's clear, the terminology is clear, the guidelines are there for everybody to follow. And oh, look, lo and behold, everything plays up to this higher purpose. So I wonder if this is the brand guidelines equivalent for 2021 and beyond. Nigel, have a view.
Oh gosh, well, I think you might be onto something there, Neil. I mean, I think what runs alongside this, or I'm sure we'd all agree with, is that, you know, one of the core elements of marketing is good, clear, simple, understood communications that could come in the form of guidelines. It could come in, you know, a range of forms. I think connected to Stephanie's point in the chat is there is absolutely a role here for marketers to demystify and get away from bits of jargon. So, you know, I mean, I work in the sustainability sector with, you know, environmental sustainability sector. I still get confused about the difference between carbon neutral and net zero, you know, and I get even more confused when I listen to other companies claim that they are carbon neutral or net zero, or, you know, I really I start to sort of, you know, get into cold sweats when people start talking about being a carbon negative, I mean, business. I sort of, you know, so I think that taking, you know, whether we own the whole of the sustainability debate, you know, we certainly don't own the whole of corporate purpose. You know, nobody's going to take that necessarily from the marketing department, but we certainly could well own that role of making sure that everybody in the organization and all of our stakeholders external to the organization understand what we really mean when we use these terms. And I think it's a great challenge for marketers to pick up that challenge and commit to being the people that help others understand what we really mean and what we're really trying to do.
I think that raises a really good point and addresses some of Stephanie's points as well, is that understanding comes first from our learning about sustainability and marketers understanding and educating themselves in that field. And me and Neil had a conversation the other day about, you know, kind of Neil's position when he moved into the marketing sphere, where marketing began to embrace digital, and how managers and senior execs who were very traditionalist in their marketing and didn't embrace digital kind of became superseded by marketers who did embrace it. And I think that's, from my position, where I took my sustainability education as that, where not what are the skill sets I need today to be a good marketer or to help companies, but what skills am I going to need in 10 to 15 years time? And, you know, is an understanding of sustainability and understanding the complexity of that subject and how it intertwines with marketing going to be the skill sets that needed to be in those senior positions in the future? And will that be the thing that succeeds the very traditional you know, marketing skill set that is needed today? And so getting into a position where marketing can be influential, it's critical that you need to understand the sustainability terminology and the impacts so that you don't fall short of those greenwashing credentials. And like I said, when it comes to net zero, net neutral, and just thinking that you can just carbon offset all of your emissions is just total crap. It's just, that's not how it works. That's not how the science works. So yeah, that surface level and understanding, and people thinking that's enough to then push that forward is the thing that people need to avoid like the plague.
Interesting. I think we're onto something here. Nigel, you've got some examples for us. Are you happy to share?
Well, actually, maybe what I might do is I might put, because I think we're running out of time, aren't we? So what I might post a couple of links into the chat that I've found of examples of greenwashing and things that are maybe not quite so bad. So I'll put those in there now, and if people want to follow up on them, they want to reach out and talk to any of us about them, then feel. But sadly there are way more examples in there of things that are bad than things that are good. So and please, if anybody works for any of these companies, I'm sure they're trying to do their best. It's
beautifully and diplomatically put, Nigel. Thank you. That was really interesting.
And I'll finish up with the link to the Levi's ones. So we'll finish on a positive point rather than the others.
Well, I think the worst and most comically bad one I've seen was I don't know if it's last year or the year before. It was a South Korean beauty cosmetics company that made a bottle. It was like card, and it said, "This is a paper bottle." And one customer ripped open the paper packaging and the cardboard to find a plastic bottle underneath. So someone greenlit that.
Everything?
Someone said, "It's fine. No one will look."
And there we go. Yes, interesting. Thank you guys so much for your time today. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. Your inputs, I think, have collectively, as I was hoping and predicting right at the start, I think, yes, I think we may well have kind of collectively produced something which is this idea of maybe a suite of self-regulated guidelines, a little bit like the sustainable version of our brand guidelines. At least it could be something that we can maybe as marketers hook onto, because we clearly have owned brand guidelines for many, many years. So the idea clearly of working to a higher purpose, again, another that obviously goes into that mix. And these things will be things that we will be exploring as we go through to the third of the series next week. And so you're able to enroll on that session, which is 12 noon on the 21st, so same time, same place, where we'll look at actually how to build a sustainable brand. So we'll look at some of the ways that we've today obviously been able to avoid the greenwashing by working to a higher purpose, maybe thinking about self-regulation, looking right across the supply chain, understanding as far as we need to the terminology, things like circular business and net zero, and just really getting a grasp of how all of the different touch points and stakeholders within our organization have a part to play, both in the positive, but also in the challenges within this whole debate for our own organizations. So I'd encourage you to really be thinking about that between now and next week, and yeah, go and talk to some of the others in your organization who potentially have either started on this journey or maybe are like-minded souls and are actually thinking about this. And if you can, put together a little sort of think tank or a little group and start to broach some of these topics and see whether that can sort of take you forward. As I say, mindfulcollective.net for some tools and ideas around the whole thing about putting purpose at the heart of your strategy, and marketingcollege.com/events if you haven't already booked onto the Building a Sustainable Brand webinar for next week. So thank you again, gentlemen, Nigel, Brendan and Joe, for your inputs. Really enjoyed this one. I think we've come up with some really, really interesting insights here as we've gone through this session. So thank you for your time and thank you for everyone attending. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you same time, same place next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.